Welcome to the New Hampshire DOE Office of Title I and Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program Compliance Monitoring Training webinar. This is a pre-recorded webinar aimed at assisting districts in the monitoring process. As a pass-through entity, the New Hampshire Department of Education, or New Hampshire DOE, awards federal grant funds to eligible subrecipients, including local educational agencies, LEAs, our school districts, and charter schools. The responsibilities of pass-through entities are given in the Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200.331, which requires New Hampshire DOE to evaluate each subrecipient's risk of noncompliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the subaward, for purposes of determining the appropriate subrecipient monitoring. In this slide, we will review the stages of monitoring for Title I Part A. Step 1. The Title I office completes a programmatic risk assessment for every LEA and charter school who accepts Title I federal funds in the spring of each year. The score obtained on the risk assessment will determine which LEAs or charter schools will be monitored. The score will also determine whether the LEA or charter school will participate in desk monitoring or an on-site monitoring visit. Step 2. Once the risk assessment is complete and the type of monitoring is determined, the New Hampshire DOE will notify the LEA or charter school, provide training on how to complete the monitoring tool, and what to expect from a monitoring visit. The New Hampshire DOE will then work with the LEA or charter school to develop a timeline to complete the monitoring visit. Step 3. Once monitoring is complete, the New Hampshire DOE will provide the LEA with a summary and final report. If there is a finding, the report will indicate a corrective action, a plan for completion, and determine when evidence of completion needs to be submitted to the New Hampshire DOE. When all of these steps are completed, the New Hampshire DOE will close out the required monitoring for that year. Grant year. All monitoring will be based on the grant award from the previous fiscal year. For example, if an LEA or charter school receives a monitoring visit in the spring of 2019, it will be based on the results of the risk assessment completed on the 2017-18 Title I grant. A risk assessment is completed yearly to determine the likelihood that a subrecipient may fail to comply with applicable rules based on a predetermined set of criteria. In the next slide, we will review the criteria for Title I. Risk assessment categories. In the spring of each year, the New Hampshire DOE conducts both a fiscal and programmatic risk assessment for all school districts and charter schools who receive federal funds. The Title I office uses the following categories to determine the level of risk for each district. The first category is grant risk amount, which is the total amount of federal funds received by subrecipient. The higher the total dollar amount of the federal grants managed by the subrecipient, the higher the potential risk, provided other risks are present. Staffing risk. The number of staff supported by Title I funds, the experience of the Title I grant manager, and any turnover in key positions such as the business office or superintendent positions. Program risk. There is more risk if subrecipient is a school-wide school, fails to link activities to an identified need in the needs assessment or the school plan, does not provide the required equitable services, or has received a formal complaint. Fiscal compliance risk. Subrecipients are at a high level of risk if they require multiple revisions of the Title I grant to receive initial approval or require a waiver to carry over unspent funds. Now we will look at methods of monitoring. The final score received on the yearly risk assessment will determine if the LEA or charter school will participate in monitoring and at what level. If a subrecipient receives a high score in the risk assessment, they will likely receive an on-site monitoring visit. If the subrecipient risk assessment score falls within the mid or low range, they will either receive a desk monitoring review or no monitoring will occur. Monitoring timeline. If through the risk assessment it is determined that an LEA will receive a desk monitoring review or an on-site monitoring visit, they will be contacted by the New Hampshire DOE to inform them of the review and the timeline for submitting requested materials to the Title I office. The Title I office will then review the materials using the criteria outlined in the monitoring guide found on the New Hampshire DOE website under Title I prior to the on-site visit. Once monitoring is complete, the Office of Title I will provide the LEA or charter school with a report describing any findings and corrective actions that the LEA or charter school will need to take. Subrecipients will receive final approval once they have met all criteria and submitted evidence that corrective action has taken place. Next, we will go over the materials that will be required during the monitoring process, either to be available during the site visit, submitted prior to the visit, or during the desk monitoring review. There are two categories of required evidence for Title I, Part A, program monitoring. The first is evidence required by each federal program receiving funds. The second is for Title I, Part A only, and includes fiscal procedures, family communications, program design and monitoring, data collection and management, opportunity, and equal educational access. In this slide is a helpful tool that can be found in Appendix B of the Title I Monitoring Guide. The required materials are listed by topic areas within the two categories explained in the last slide: general topics across federal ESSA programs and Title I Part A. A full list of the topic areas and a deeper description of each can be found in the Title I Part A Monitoring Guide on the New Hampshire DOE website under Title I. The first requirement out of 25 is the needs assessment procedure. LEAs and charter schools are required to conduct annual needs assessments for each federal program. Documentation that this took place, a summary of assessment, and evidence of stakeholder involvement will be required. Another example is requirement number 3, affirmation of consultation with participating private school officials and description of equitable services. This requirement explains the documentation that will be required, as well as a list of possible questions that may be asked by the New Hampshire DOE during a desk monitoring review or an on-site visit. These questions will assist the New Hampshire DOE in learning more about the process that took place and to determine if the process meets expectations of Title I under ESSA. Requirement number 17 falls under the evidence of Title I Part A category and is part of the program design and monitoring. Evaluating the Title I Part A program is an annual requirement of an LEA and charter school. Documentation showing evidence that an evaluation has been completed, data analyzed, and revision plans will be required as part of the monitoring. LEAs are required to use LEA funds to provide educational services in Title I schools that are comparable to services provided in non-Title I schools. Each year, Title I LEAs are required to demonstrate through appropriate documentation that they are in compliance with the Title I comparability requirements. The LEA's comparability procedure should be in writing and state that comparability is an annual requirement. It should identify the office responsible for making the comparability calculations and sources of the data, and should include the measure and process used to determine whether schools are comparable. The procedure should also include the LEA's timeline for demonstrating comparability and when the LEA makes adjustments in school staffing when schools are not comparable. In the next slide, we will take a deeper look at one of the topic areas used for review during monitoring. In pages 22 through 35 of the Title I, Part A Program Monitoring Guide, you will find the tool to be used to prepare for and during monitoring. The tool consists of 4 columns. Starting from the left to right of the screen is the requirement, the criteria for the requirement, a blank space in which LEAs or charter schools will provide evidence to support completion of the requirement, and lastly, a column for the New Hampshire DOE to record if the requirement is met. Please note there are many requirements listed that the New Hampshire DOE has not yet implemented and will not be reviewed in monitoring. Monitoring report. LEAs and charter schools have up to 6 months to demonstrate through evidence provided to the New Hampshire DOE that their programs have complied with any and all required corrective action plans. Actions implemented to achieve compliance should continue as a regular part of the LEA or charter schools Title I, Part A services in subsequent years. Thank you for taking the time to review this webinar. For a full copy of the monitoring guide, risk assessment, and monitoring training webinar, please visit the New Hampshire DOE website at www.education.nh.gov/instruction/title_I_A_helping.htm.